They're still talking about Mark Driscoll and the fall of Mars Hill Church, so this is what you've been searching for. It's being talked about and searched for on the internet, so I guess we're talking about Mark Driscoll again. I'm Joel Fieri. Stay tuned. Previously, I did a podcast commenting on the first couple of episodes of the Christianity Today podcast called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill Church, talking about Mark Driscoll and his church in Seattle. Again, how it rose and how it fell rather drastically and disastrously in their view. And I wanted to pick up because I've taken in a few more of the podcasts. I haven't gotten through all of them yet, but I'm a busy guy trying. But through the internet, you can do it on demand whenever you want, which is a great thing. It's what we do here at Christian Podcast Central. So I'm going to give you my thoughts on it as I've listened to it so far. And in listening to some of the episodes that have gone on, early on they mentioned boomers, how a lot of what happened at Mars Hill and what was happening at church at that time is in reaction to how boomers did church. Now, I'm a boomer myself. I'm a late boomer. If you don't know what boomers are, it's baby boomers, those of us born from right after World War II, from 1946 through about mid-60s. I was born in 1960, so I say I'm a late boomer. I'm right on the cusp between boomer and Gen X, I think. So if you're into those kind of labels, I would call myself a boomer. And I do know what they're talking about when they talk about how boomers did church and how we changed the way America did church. And I can see where they're going with it, because what we did as boomers, we were born, like I said, to World War II parents at a time when after World War II, our parents had just saved the world. And there was this really a sense that God had used the Western democracies for sure, and America in particular, to save the world from a couple monstrous evils called Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. Fascism and some really horrible things happened in that war, and we stopped some horrible things from happening and really saved the world and entered an era of prosperity that, frankly, those people deserve, because they did a really incredible thing. And churches, especially the mainline denomination churches, traditional churches, were very much very popular and had a lot of World War II people going to them and raising their families in them. So a lot of us were raised in traditional churches. But it's funny, the thing about boomers is we came along at a time when that victory kicked off a huge wave of prosperity. And the world really changed for us for a lot of different reasons, because of that prosperity, because of the technology that was emerging, cars, television, modern appliances in the home. And something else that emerged was pop culture. Those things, television especially, and radio, brought pop culture into our lives. And young people had never had that before. So we as boomers, we had a lot of entertainment at our disposal. And because of all these modern conveniences that they talked about then, that were such a miracle to my parents and their generation, to us, they were just kind of something that was always around. We never had to worry about a lot of the things that our parents had to worry about just to survive. Survival was pretty much guaranteed to us. We weren't depression people. We weren't living in an era when things were rough. So we had a lot of security that previous generations didn't have, and we were young, which meant we were immature. But we were able to continue with our immaturity without any consequences, because we had all these basics of life covered and taken care of. So we were the first generation that could be immature and not die, if that makes sense, and not really have trouble in life. Okay, and so when we were sitting in church and it was boring, which church is to someone who's immature, we kind of whined about it, and we were distracted, and we were distracted by all these other things, all this other music, all these other stories that were being told through TV or movies or whatever it was. And we had records and radio to listen to. We didn't need to listen to these stuffy old hymns, right? So our parents realized, hey, we need to give them something that'll keep them in church. So they gave us a little bit more entertaining church. And back then it was just guys standing up, young guys standing up with guitars, singing songs that were a little more folksy and a little more rockish, maybe. So that's how we're the ones that started the wave of more contemporary church, more entertaining church. But the difference is the key thing was we were still under the leadership of those World War II veterans, that World War II generation that was more mature, more responsible, that knew how the world worked and knew that what we had been saved from. Fast forward a while, and all of a sudden, our children, the millennials and the Gen Zs, or whatever you want to call them now, they, about 20 years ago, started thinking the way we did church with just our guitars and our folksy kind of stuff was boring. So we thought, well, what can we give them to make sure they're entertained? Well, they even took a lot of the stuff because they had the internet generation, they had social media, they took it to even further depths of entertainment church. But the difference with them is they're now being led by the immature baby boomers who never grew up. So about 20 years ago, this started manifesting itself in something called the emergent church. The emerging church and the emergent church. I remember there were two strands of that. Mark Driscoll was on the cutting edge of that. And he was really the first super famous internet star in that phenomenon of the emerging church and emergent church. So in a lot of ways, the growing pains and all the things that were wrong and started off wrongly with the emergent church, he kind of became the poster boy. And now, looking back and examining that, because the emergent church has basically, in my view, failed, and in most people's views has not lived up to its promise and what it aspired to at the beginning. There's been a lot of heresies. A lot of the pastors that were leaders of that movement have fallen every bit as hard as Mark Driscoll. But because Mark Driscoll was the big star, well, he's the one that we're talking about continually now. So it's a little unfair to him, but at the same time, he very much aspired to be this big celebrity. So a lot of the things that are coming out in this documentary series, this podcast, are fair, in my view. It also goes to what basically we as boomers and millennials and Gen Xers, Gen Zers, whatever, we like young leaders. We as baby boomers liked young people. We like singing with them. We like them teaching us. But the problem is we tend to like them a little bit too much. And when we were leading in this emerging movement, not only did we want our young people to have young leaders teaching them, we kind of abandoned our overseer role, our elder role. We more or less conformed ourselves as old people, and you see it all over church. You see baby boomers, people older than me, in flip-flops and, with their hair gelled or whatever. We are trying to lower ourselves, in a sense, to the level of the young people that we are putting in leadership of the church. And we're abandoning that responsibility to be the elders. And I see it all over the place. And we have kind of left the younger generation rudderless because we've given them these young pastors who didn't have a lot of experience. Mark Driscoll was a rough guy before he became a Christian by his own admission. He's from the streets of Philadelphia. He did some damage by his own admission, and he became a Christian and started this church without a whole lot of grounding, doesn't sound like. And when he did have older pastors mentoring him, they were a little bit too caught up in the celebrity that he had. I mean, I have no doubt that in their hearts they really did want to disciple him, really did want to mentor him, but they were caught up in the youth movement that he was creating, in the celebrity that he had, and they saw, and it brings out in this podcast, that they kind of saw that they could get a little bit out of him. They could, ride his celebrity a little bit. So they kind of abandoned the role of elder leader with him. And I know not all have, actually personal knowledge, not all did that, of the leaders that he looked at did that. But I think that's where the elder generation has failed the emerging church, the millennials, whatever you would call it, just as it seems a lot of the elder leadership that Mark Driscoll should have been under kind of failed him, and he kind of rebelled against it. He sought to kind of use them, and they sought to kind of use him, and it just didn't seem like everybody had their roles squared away. And I think a lot of that is from that boomer sensibility that we have from the old days, when we thought we wanted to be cool when we were under leadership, to now that we are leadership, we still want to be cool, and we didn't really take our elder leadership seriously, and we haven't been the stable force that our children and grandchildren need. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the sense I got when I was listening to some of the early podcasts in this series, that here's a guy who was obviously very gifted, who obviously really wanted to have an impact, but he was a little bit too young, a little bit too immature, and he got way too famous and way too big, way too fast, and there was nobody to pull him in. By the time someone did try and pull him in, he wasn't really hearing it. He had to have a hard fall, and he did. So I think, again, it's a worthwhile podcast. It's a little bit piling on with Mark Driscoll, but at the same time, he's probably the best cautionary tale we have right now as for what is the right way and the wrong way. And I hope people are listening. I hope a lot of young Christian leaders are listening to it. I hope a lot of older Christian leaders are listening to it, because I think there's a lot to learn. And I think CT is doing a pretty decent job of staying on that, with that spirit of, hey, this is something we can learn from. It's a little clickbaity. They throw in a few things that are a little controversial, but that's kind of the world we live in too. It's one of the reasons I'm talking about it. Face it, folks. I'm the president of a Christian podcast network. I need you guys clicking, so I'm going to talk about Mark Driscoll. It's just the way it is. So, but hopefully I have that spirit too of learning from it. And if you sense I don't, please tell me in the comments and tell me what your take is. And always, as always, if you like these podcasts, like them. The button's right down there. If you want to share this with somebody that you think might enjoy it, I think the share button might be somewhere down there. Okay? Please do that. Please comment. Please go to Christian Podcast Central for more content like this. I'm Joel Fieri. Thanks for listening.